Actually, today we want to talk about why pharma companies will miss out if they're not engaging with startups, and we want to discuss like how are they doing it and what's working, what's not working, what are the processes like, and what's the best way to engage with corporates and with startups. So Marco, actually, like if you look at the corporate startup collaboration, you work with many large pharma companies already. So what have been your your biggest insights on this?
Yeah, thanks, Kriszti, and good afternoon. I hope you also have some Q&As or some questions, dear audience. Yeah, big pharma. I think one of the most interesting fields at the moment. What we see, all patient-centric solutions, or how can we support patients with digital tools? If it comes to therapy, to diagnostics. This is super important. Also, data exchange along the whole health value chain is super important for pharma. But to say, okay, the big but is how they actually can benefit working with startups, how they set up processes. This is at the moment super difficult, and yeah, many big pharma are kind of redesigning their internal structures, setting up teams and processes to really leverage the startup ecosystem and benefit from the innovation potential.
Yeah, so actually there's sorry if I interrupt you, because you're like, the way your lips are moving are not in sync with the voice. So I don't mean to interrupt, but I'll try my best. So like there's so many different ways how a startup could collaborate with a pharma company. They could acquire a startup, they can have an accelerator program, or they could co-develop a solution together, or they just do licensing in. So which one is in your opinion, which one is the most popular one, and why is that? So what are the trends in terms of startup corporate collaborations?
Yeah, when it comes to digital health, I see collaboration, co-developing solutions, modifying a startup solution, or using a solution of a startup and then modify to the specific disease or the specific therapy a pharma is addressing. I wouldn't say the acquisitions or the M&A space is so hot in the digital health area. It's more in the biotech space to fill the pipeline of a pharma company. Also, we do see some corporate venture capital activities, but my personal recommendation wouldn't be to have a strong CVC arm. I would say if you internally identify the challenges or potential fields where a startup solution could add value, then I would reach out to the startup ecosystem, identify some startups, and then co-develop or modify the startup solution depending on your needs. So for example, if it's on diabetes, you want to offer diabetes patients a tool, let's say, to guide them through their daily routines, then use a startup solution, co-develop, and maybe co-brand the solution or ask for a white label solution, and then it's big pharma A, B, Z diabetes solution. And this would be my recommendation. It's the most easiest way. And I would say it's also the fastest, because if you conduct a due diligence, either for M&A or for venture capital, it's too long. And especially in the digital health space, I would recommend to co-develop.
Yeah, so actually my personal experience, we don't do that much of a co-development at Egis Pharmaceuticals. We're mainly focusing on either so we have an acquisition team, and they've been working on this for a while now, but we're mainly focusing on licensing in technology. So what you just mentioned, white labeling a solution, and probably that's the fastest one. And the reason why we decided doing that is because many of the startups are at that point, Series A plus level. So they have their solution ready. They are on the market. They have other partners now. So it's easier internally to start a process like that. But we are definitely on the same, I'm on the same page that co-development is definitely something that pharma companies and also us are interested in the future. But then co-development mainly starts with earlier stage startups.
That's true. How do you identify potential, I would say, matches in the startup world, Kriszti?
So first, like, like how do we find startup solutions is always like the most challenging part, and it starts internally. So first we actually, like we get all the relevant people on board, and we do we pick first the therapeutic area, and then we do challenge shaping session. Mm-hmm. Oh, now you're moving. Sorry. Yeah, I continue this thought. I just like, sorry, you're not in sync. Yeah, so we do challenge shaping. We're trying to be very clear on our goals, what we want. And I think it's something to maybe talk a little bit more about, like to be clear why we want to work with startups. What are the business goals? What are the outcomes? Like, do we want to innovate, or do we want to, just help with our digital transformation processes, or do we want to have financial outcomes of working with a startup? So for us, it starts with identifying what we need, where we can add value to our patients next to medication. But that's like a half a day workshop, and that's how we start all of our processes. So what's your, no, sorry, I just wanted to ask, what's your experience, about how clear on other pharma companies on their goals? Because I see so many of these programs where pharma companies are putting out challenges, and sometimes they are very general. So they are around a certain topic, but do you think they should be very precise on what they are looking for, or you think it's enough if they are just more general?
I fully agree on this challenge-based approach, and it's more importantly to look inside a company in the beginning and outside the company, because looking into the past 3, 4, 5 years in the chemical pharma space, and it was in the beginning, it was like nice to work with startups, to tap in, you visit some conference and see, oh, there might be a cool, interesting startup. They're doing something with digital health. So I just reach out to the startup and trying to push it into the company and try to find relevant people. But similar to what you mentioned, first of all, talk to people internally and ask them what are processes, what are medication where a digital add-on could be helpful. And then based on this, you go actively into the market, screen the market, and approach startups. And this is what I think, or at least what we see here, when we engage with pharma companies, that they also change their processes. That in the beginning it was some marketing activities, some promotion activities, a nice add-on, but they didn't have a KPI on what actually came out at the end. But it was rather how many projects did you start, and then it was this proof of concept, proof of value stage, where they tested the startup solution. Yes, I download a chatbot, and then I use the chatbot, and then I evaluate it for 3 months. But I didn't sync it with, for example, a specific medication on anxiety. And this is what we see now. The big pharmacies, they need to create value out of startup collaboration, and so they have more this on-demand and challenge-based approach.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to talk more about the pilot part and how necessary it is to have a pilot. But first, I wanted to ask you about the scouting. What's your experience? How other pharma companies are trying to find the startups? Are they trying to put out public challenges, or do they do it internally, or do they go to a third party? Here we are actually working with third-party solutions because we wanted to work with experts on scouting the best startups for us. But there comes a point where after that, you really need to be involved. So after around when you narrow it down to 20, that's where you need to be involved, get very involved. And the more you narrow it down, the more departments you have to involve in the process. Is it possible to work later on with this startup, from an IT perspective or compliance perspective, or some some others. So that's how we do it. Like we get like a long list. They start like narrowing it down for us, but then we get very much involved in the process. So that's our approach. But I'm just curious to hear, like, what do you see? How do other pharma companies are scouting for startups?
Yeah, they do it differently, or there are different approaches in the space. Some pharma companies say, "I'm the pharma company. I hire scouts, and so fully hired scouts, and they need to scout because I don't want to use any third parties." But we also see, at least our partners, when they come to us, then they use a third party because they want to also benefit from to see what you mentioned, like the expert level plus to see what's going on in the market. And as we see, open innovation is the best way to solve global healthcare problems. We know in specific areas, in specific diseases, okay, there are startups in this space. And if you start from scratch, it's super difficult because you obviously can use some databases, but it's so much effort to go and screen these startups, because you then in the end, it's not enough to, I would say, scan a pitch deck or go through the homepage. And so we say it's very important to, right in the beginning, to talk to the startup. And this is something I would say we provide for pharma companies, that we will only share the startups we have directly talked to. And we do have one approach where we work with long list and short list, and then it's different levels of involvement. But obviously, which is more beneficial, if pharma companies, if they work on I would say in a long-term process, and they say, okay, now we focus on oncology, and we need startups who guide cancer patients on a journey. This is something we would like to dive in. It could be now there's a interesting startup. It could be in 3 or 6 months' time there's a nice startup or very valuable solution popping up in the market. And therefore, some of the corporates, they're approaching us to say, we need you to be like a satellite in the startup atmosphere, and always have touch points once a month, once a quarter. And so there are different approaches. What I also see is that especially big pharma, they kind of use all the tools. They have a corporate venture capital unit, they do scouting. They have a venture building, they do their own scouting. They do have scouts, they do have corporate scouts, they do have business unit scouts. There's probably a set of different tools. I would always recommend to be involved. To either, if you are the expert, then it's good. If you're not the expert, hire an expert. And always, at least listen with one ear to see how the startup is like ticking. It's not enough to just receive an Excel file.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like I can fully relate to what you were saying, like how important it is to engage with the startup itself. And that comes back to like, expectation management. So when we, for example, go down to like around like 20, 25 startups for a certain challenge, then we actually call up the startups and asking questions, because not every startup wants to actually work with corporate. So that's the number one question, if they're open or not. And once we actually, like, we explain like what are we looking for, and once we get to like to like 5 to 6 startups, that's when we starting like like a collaboration shaping workshop with them, like kind of like, or a selection workshop to be very exact, where we actually put down like even in like writing, or we do like a workshop in Miro board about like what are we expecting from the startups and what the startups expecting from us from this collaboration. So if it goes through, then we want to make sure that it's a win-win situation, that everyone's happy. Because sometimes like and what we started talking about, the pilot part, we always want to start with a pilot, but we want to do a pilot because we want to make sure that we want a longer term collaboration as well. Like for us, it's always the goal to have a longer term collaboration, but we want to test it. So yeah, just I wanted to ask you about that. Like, how do you feel and what do you see? Like, do corporates should always run a pilot or a POC, or is something that you think corporates should skip it and go straight to a long-term collaboration? And if corporate's doing a pilot, then how much should it be and who should cover it?
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of the term POC, so proof of concept. I call the term proof of value, to not test the concept of a startup or the technology of a startup, but rather focusing, does the startup solution adds value? So if the chatbot is working, okay, cool. But if the chatbot is the chatbot working for our specific patient cohort or not? And I think this is very important to differentiate. But yes, similar. So what we always recommend is to have first an engagement workshop. When you have scouted a startup, you say, yes, this might be a solution we can work with. Have an engagement workshop where both parties on eye level put on the table the things they need, the things they want, and the things they expect. And so if both parties can agree, okay, we somehow get a chance to be on the same page, then you can that both parties need to go back to see if this is something they can align on, and then you have an alignment maybe a week later, a couple of days, or 4 weeks later, and then you can define this proof of concept or proof of value, this pilot project. So I would recommend pilot project, especially in a digital space, is quite easy to set up a pilot. But similar to what you mentioned, Kriszti, set up the goals. What would you just tap into this new market to see how it works, or would you directly sync it with a specific medication, as an example? And this is always important. Follow the what is the mission, what is the goal, the objective you as big pharma are following? Is this in line with the startup goals, and is the approach beneficial for both parties? It's not okay that one party just wants to see or takes out the benefits. This is very important. Speak on eye level, and there we did very good. We had very good experience, but we also had some experience where during a pilot or if the goals and the expectations are not set 100%, then at least one point during the whole process it will lead to a conflict.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the benefits of the pilot, like it's kind of cheap, and you're testing it in a limited, either location or a limited amount of patients. So if it doesn't work, you can just easily shut it down. But if you write a contract for like 2 years, then you're stuck. So at least you can test the solution, test how it works. And also, for a lot of corporates, it's also about like see how they can actually work with the startup. So it's personally, I can say that it's not an easy process, and it's very important that you're finding the right people internally. You need to have from each department the right people. And what we started doing is we actually created the agile teams within the organization to work together with the startup to create the pilot plan, kind of. Because it's very important that we have everyone on board for this. So what do you think, like, what is the best way, and maybe some of your partners already shared that with you, to create this internal team and finding the right people internally who can best work with startups, because there is like definitely a cultural gap and the difference between how startup works and how corporate works.
Yeah, and I think seeing this cultural gap is super important, because otherwise you will just start and kick off something, and therefore we also recommend to kind of try to informally understand what are the strengths and weaknesses in which team, what are the people who are more open, because especially when we see this layer of, I would say, innovation or digital transformation teams, they have budget for innovation projects, but in the end you need the experts internally. And if you just start your pilots in your digital innovation space, then it won't lead to any further startup engagement. So you need to identify the guys and girls who are in the business units, in the lab, in research facilities. And what I did in my previous job, we scheduled lunch breaks with potential internal partners. And during a lunch break, if you're not walk around and say, hey, I'm from the innovation team, I can help you to work with startups. And if you just get your lunch break and say, hey, I would like to understand more what you're doing currently in the lab, what are the things what are new projects, what is like day-to-day routines, what are challenges you currently face. So first of all, you understand what are content-wise topics. And secondly, you informally understand, is this person more a open person? Is this person maybe also flooded with work? Because most of the startup and innovation projects, they will come on top. And after a while, then they just simply don't have time. And you as an innovation manager, you want to work with the startup want to work, there's budget. But the people who need to evaluate the startup don't have time. And all these, I would say, or I would call them soft factors, you can easily understand them if you reach out via lunch break or coffee break. And then you somehow have see the patterns and you see the people who are more open or have more time or are in the right business unit you can work with and approach for startup solutions.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great approach, and the more the people mingle together and also have casual chats can definitely help later on how they collaborate and work together. I think another important factor here is that to make a corporate startup collaboration successful, if the decisions are coming from C-level. I think it has to come from the top, because otherwise people will say it's not priority, I don't have time for it, and so on. So we realized that, and for each pilot or corporate startup collaboration for us starts with our CEO actually, and then they delegate and all the directors of each department, they delegate one person who will be working on a certain project. So we do FTE calculation for that. So they are fully on board, and after that it's just a matter of time to finding the right person who is more keen on working on digital projects, for example, from a legal team or from a medical team, who are more eager to be part of an agile team working together, coming up with ideas, being very flexible. Now we're just working currently on a pilot contract, and it's not an easy process because you have to involve a lot of people. So you have to make sure that they all can adopt and flexible and understanding, because it can be very painful for everyone. So how do you feel about starting this from the top? I know for larger pharma companies, sometimes it's more difficult, but I think it has to come from management.
Yeah, definitely. In the beginning, when I started in this startup corporate space, I thought it's just a nice phrase, top management commitment and top management support. But we see this is crucial. If you don't have a clear strategy and in the end a commitment of C-level or senior management, it simply won't work, because then it will be deprioritized in the whole team and you don't have the mandate to kind of walk around and start these projects and really, I would say, put some pressure or some priority on these topics. So I wouldn't, I rechanged my experience in terms of, yes, top management support is crucial. If you, for example, have I would say startup pitch, you organize a startup pitch internally and you have your CEO or your CTO coming and sharing his thoughts on it and showing commitment, I think is super important. Otherwise, they kind of just smile at you as an innovation manager or an innovation team and say, yeah, we do the business and you just have some money, some gambling money. So this is important to break this up and say, no, we can add value to the whole corporate, and involving people is super relevant. We had one very successful job with a pharma company, and I was also skeptical in the beginning, because from the very first meeting on with the startups, it was still in the kind of selection phase, and there were like 16, 18 people from the pharma company in the call, and then 2, 3, 4 from the startup. But in the end, we somehow, it led to the fact that everyone was involved and everyone was super interested how this this continues, so from regulatory, from IP, from legal, from marketing team, from R&D team, and then although it was all virtually, they all felt being part of the startup project, and therefore top level or top management commitment and involving the right people and rather a larger group right from the beginning is super helpful, because then you kind of form a team.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, fully agree with that. I just counted today that, you know, even just here to set up a pilot process, and we need to involve like 10 different departments. And I know it can be scary for a startup who are like showing up with 1 or 2 person for like, you know, a kickoff meeting, but, you know, also and also with an army, but it's actually very important that we have all these people on board for the process, because it will be necessary for even just, you know, just to start with the contract. But just going back to my question, like I just wanted to ask your opinion: should should corporate pay for the pilots, and if so, then how much should that be?
Yes, I would say corporates should pay for the pilot, especially when we're in the pharma space. Corporates should have the capabilities to pay the pilot. And this is also what we see changing in the startup ecosystem. Similar to the investment side, years ago, startups were running around finding investors. Today, it's rather the best startups can choose the investors putting money on the table. Similar when it comes to pilots. Today, or having the expectation as big pharma to run a 3-month pilot with a startup and not paying for it is simply not up to date anymore. And we, as I would say, objective neutral spot, I also say, although if startups are not paying us, but rather big pharma are paying us, we also tell big pharma you should pay, because you cannot expect a startup, especially if they need to focus on cash flow. So if it's in an early phase, if it's you can't say, okay, run this pilot for free, and maybe in 3, 6, 9, 12 months time, then you will receive a big project. This is not the case anymore, and we see the best startups, they can choose their pilot partners, and therefore you should put money on the table, at least that the startup is somehow not even cost equal, but also to pay attention to the startup and pay attention to or pay valuable attention to the startup. And therefore, yeah, I think price depending on the solution and depending on how the startup should modify their solution for the pilot. But a typical sum we see is like 15 to 25K to run as a pilot. And once again, if not big pharma is paying this money, other industries are struggling more. And this is what we see now. If you treat your startups well, and see your startups on eye level and see startups as partners, you can't say to Google or to any other partners, you just develop it for free and then we'll see how the relationship goes on. This is very important. This is crucial. Big pharma should pay for pilots.
Yeah. No, yeah, I understand and I agree. I see some companies are doing the opposite, because now more and more startups are approaching them. So they are saying like it's good for them that they can use our logo and test our systems. But yeah, the majority is still like paying for the startup. So we're on the same page. I think we're running out of time. So maybe just one final thought here is just like, what would be your number one tip on how corporates and startups would improve their relationship?
Yeah, clear goal from both sides, and also, so especially for corporates, when they approach startups, what is the potential outcome we expect, and then sharing this in a very transparent way and say, hey, startups, we would like to work with you. This is the goal we're following. This is what we expect from you. Can you provide this? And listen to the startup feedback, because what you mentioned just now, like putting a big pharma logo on your startup's wall or on your homepage is definitely worth. But if startups like overpromise their solution, then it will also lead to frustration. And for startups, the same. Have a clear set up a clear objective, and don't oversell your solution, and don't don't follow the first company, the first pilot. Be very sure, can we manage this? Can we do this? So expectation management is the headline I would mention, I would share.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect closing thought, I think. So maybe we can check if we have any questions. If not, then I think we will be redirected to a different room.
Yeah, so we have one I can open the chat. There's one Q&A from Frank. He's asking, and I would ask this question to you, Kriszti, as you are the pharma representative. Does it make sense to work with external specialists?
External specialists on what? But yeah, in some cases we work with external specialists, but there's so many times it's just like you just have to figure it out internally. So we actually worked with a third party provider who helped us in the whole journey, from like the challenge shaping, the scouting, and also after that, like with workshops and the pilot part. But when we got to the pilot part, they couldn't really help us because it just like I have to know like who should be involved, what is our processes here. And an external person not going to be as familiar with our processes. That's something that we have to figure it out internally. Unfortunately, it would be great if we could have like boxed packages and have someone from outside come in and just do all of this painful stuff for us. But so far I haven't seen any solutions for that. But for like scouting and for workshops and so a couple of other things involving like an external expert is definitely a good thing.
Yeah, I would say yes. It's definitely worth, but similar to startup corporate relation here, if the goals are clearly set. So this is also what we see when we got kind of hired as a third party. Have a clear expectation management and define, okay, what is the job? Is it purely scouting? How is the involvement in pilots? And it's also not possible for a third party to go into a pharma and internally find the right persons. Therefore, setting up also a framework is super important. Otherwise, it's just not kind of serious if you also overpromise and oversell the third parties. And I think no more questions here in the chat. So we probably got either redirected, or I will try if I can go to the virtual Q&A room.
Yeah, that still doesn't work for me, but you let me know if there's anything. But I think it's definitely an interesting topic, and we will see a lot more corporate startup collaborations. We will probably have more and more conversations around this later on.
Yes, so I also I don't see anyone in the Q&A space.
Yeah, I checked the Gather platform, but also like I can't see anything there. So not sure. But thanks for all the 5 people who joined us today. And we will spread the word. And if anyone have any questions to us later on, we are definitely happy to help and talk and discuss this topic, because we are both very keen on this and hoping that we can provide more and more, startup solutions for patients. And
reach out to us, connect via LinkedIn, and then stay healthy, guys. See you soon. Thanks, Kriszti.
All right, thanks. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.